So welcome to Tech and Drugs. Today, I'm joined by Laura Matz, the Chief Science and Technology Officer at Merck KGaA. Laura is responsible for shaping the innovation agenda of a company with more than 350 years of history across chemistry, biotechnology, and advanced materials. In her role, she works closely with the executive board and innovation leaders across Merck's life science, healthcare, and electronic businesses, driving the integration of data, AI, and digital technologies to unlock new business models and accelerate impact. She also led the launch of Athenia, a joint venture with Palantir Technologies focused on enabling secure data collaboration across the semiconductor ecosystem. Before stepping in her current role, Laura spent over 2 decades in the semiconductor industry, including leadership positions at EMD Electronics, where she drove innovation in material and manufacturing. Beyond Merck, she serves on multiple boards, including the American Institute of Chemical Engineers and the Ion Labs, contributing to the future of both engineering and AI-driven drug discovery. Laura sits in a rare intersection of science, technology, and business, and brings a deeply practical perspective on how innovation actually happens at scale. Laura, it's a real pleasure to have you here. We met several times, and I'm really glad that you're joining the show today.
Thibault, thank you so much. It's really an honor, and given that I've listened to some of your prior podcasts, I'm really honored to be part of this journey with you.
So one thing I like to do when that I've done, I think, with every guest is stepping back, as early as childhood, to understand how someone gets to where they are today, and what was the journey, what is it that led you to what you are doing today, essentially.
Yeah, so I guess I have to go deep back into the memories of where I started. Yeah, so I was born in Pennsylvania in the United States to 2 math teachers. So this probably explains some of my scientific curiosity to begin with. And all of my family was teachers. So I think if I look back and think, where did my kind of scientific interest come from? It was more this sort of learning environment where they were always pushing for learning new things, helping kind of build on what was already known. And for me, that was just part of the discussions at the dinner table. I would say the other piece that if I look back in my childhood that was really fun is I played a lot of sports. I played basketball, softball, I ran cross country. And, the thing that I took away, from the earliest years on that was that kind of team environment. I just really loved being part of a team, working with everyone else to win a game, to, figure out how we could improve. And, to this day, that's sort of, those are my favorite memories. I was on a basketball team in high school, and we went to states 3 years in a row. And, for a small rural town in Pennsylvania, this is actually a huge deal. We were competing with Philadelphia schools and Harrisburg schools. So to be part of this team, and it was all about working together. I was a guard. I'm not the tallest person, but because we had this really great team dynamic, we actually, as 5 of us on the court, we worked really well together. And I think I kind of take that forward.
Do you still follow the WNBA and the NBA?
I do. And
favorite players?
Caitlin Clark now, of course. But actually, I'm also a huge fan of the NCAA. So I'm a March Madness kind of fanatic. I went to the Final Four 1 year when I was in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And my favorite team is Duke. So I'm always rooting for them. They didn't make it to the finals this year, but they're always in the mix.
Yeah, now in France, we are, I think, all following the NBA because we have Victor Wembanyama,
right,
who is doing a pretty good job, and I think they will announce the MVP for the year, and he's number 2 at the moment, so we are still rooting for him. But
it's okay. Number 2 in the NBA is still pretty good.
It's not bad.
yes, yeah. But there's a lot of European players coming into the NBA, and I think that's what makes it also really fun. Is this kind of dynamic environment where you have people from all over the world that play professionally. And when I was a kid, my dad would take us every year to go see the Philadelphia team play, and it was like one of my favorite nights. We would go, we would get popcorn, we would watch the players. At the time, the There was one player that was 7 foot. I think his knees came up above his head when he sat down. I mean, it's really, really amazing. But the skill that they have is incredible.
So from basketball then to science.
To science. So when I went to college, I knew I was good at math and I was good at chemistry and biology. These were some of my favorite teachers in high school. And so I said, well, I'll go into medicine. And so I went pre-med and, I picked chemistry as kind of the primary track. About 2 years into my college, I went to watch two surgeries, both hip replacements. And if you've watched a hip replacement, it's quite involved. I fainted both times and I decided maybe not. So, and then at the same time, I was a junior in college and I had 2 professors that just, I don't know, really inspired me. One was a female professor from Russia, and she kind of pulled me aside and said, hey, you have real talent here. You have a real experimental, I think what she said was, I have a very experimental mindset. And she sent me to a conference. She got me an internship at Savannah River for the next summer. And I think from then on, that I was locked. Because this ability to experiment and then kind of prove out the data and see, and really, especially in kind of quantitative analysis, really get the exact right number was just fascinating for me. And that kind of began my journey. So when I was thinking about, okay, what do I want to do after college? She helped me get into Washington State University. I went across the United States. I got in my car with a couple bags and drove across the country. And I started, working in a lab, again, at a national lab. And I think this experience of science being a way to learn and, kind of understand the world around you was just, for me, fascinating, because I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. But, I was working on, when I did my graduate studies, I was working on everything from detecting explosive residues. This was, at the time of kind of the beginning of the detectors in the airports, all the way to chemical warfare agents and then getting into proteins. And so when you look at the span of what chemistry involves and the things that I got to work on, I mean, it was just incredible. And I think from that point on, I was sort of hooked in going broad, but using the science to kind of understand, the world.
So fast forward to today. So you have a really unique job title. So I know CSO, I know CTO. I think you're the only person that I know who is a Chief Science and Technology Officer. I think it fits quite well also with Merck, because Merck has such a diverse portfolio and is touching so many areas, from life science to healthcare to material and electronics. So can you tell us a bit more about this role? So what is this role? Sure.
So I think this role is relevant at this moment in time. So, and maybe just to explain, I think, how I fit into this role. So I'm a chemist by training, as I said, but then I quickly, when I completed my graduate studies, I went into semiconductor engineering. Mm-hmm. And so for the first 20 years of my career, I always worked in engineering oriented companies, so more tech oriented than science oriented, and run in commercial roles and R&D roles. Now coming back into Merck, I was part of an acquisition that Merck acquired. You have everything. You have the science and the tech, because we have an electronics division, but we also have a life science division and a healthcare division. And so this really spans the combination of science and tech. I think when the CEO came in May of 2021, she said, the world of technology, AI, digital automation, combined with science is coming closer together. Now, this is, of course, the ChatGPT moment, but I will say, from my perspective, this made perfect sense, because I had sort of bridged both worlds. And so what does it mean today? It means leveraging technology to enable science to go faster, to make more of an impact. And that's sort of what I work on with the 3 sectors, is to figure out how to do that most effectively.
So you wrote a piece some time ago, I remember, on the changing role of the CSTO, and you just mentioned it also, things where there was a pre and a post GPT era.
Yes.
So can you touch a little bit on that? We'll discuss it in more detail, but I'd love to get a bit of a teaser of what you think about how your role has evolved just in the past few years.
Sure. I mean, I think this time period is fascinating for CTOs, CIOs, because CSOs, because the world is changing so fast that the roles have to evolve with that. So I had worked for a CTO earlier in my career. And at that time, the CTO role was build a big innovation team, kind of work on internal R&D for the future, maybe in a new area that the company wasn't in today. But if you fast forward to now, that model is just too slow. There's too much happening to assume that you can invent everything internally, that you can hire all the talent that you need. And so today, I think the CSTO role and kind of how I've shaped it is to say, look, we have to drive partnerships. We have to test out the things that we're building, whether it's in the sectors or in my team or typically in combination, as quickly as possible, and really rapidly screen through what technologies are impactful and what aren't. And that becomes, I think, ever more important because AI is just moving so fast and it's shaping things so quickly that the speed has to be the primary sort of goal for building new innovation areas. So
you have experience in multiple industries, which is really interesting. And one thing I wanted to touch on with you is what pharma can learn from other industries. So in the semiconductor industry, we talk about the Moore's law. In the pharma industry, we talk about the Eroom's law because the cost of developing a drug keeps increasing. I think now in the past few years, it's finally stabilized. But if you look at the cost of developing a drug from the 1950s until today, adjusted by inflation, it increased by 100 times. So what is it that we can learn from the semiconductor industry or other industry you've been involved in that will be transferable to the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite topics. And actually, we just did a panel at CES this year where we came together and talked about bringing Moore's law sort of philosophy into pharma to solve cancer, to create a cure for cancer, or for immunology diseases. What I would say, so given that I've spent most of my career in semiconductor, the interesting thing when you kind of dig below Moore's law, what that really means for everyone in the semiconductor value chain and ecosystem is that everyone operates on a very specific cadence. Every 2 years, you roll out new nodes. That means, in the material space, if you're working on a novel material, regardless of whether it's perfect, at some point you have to lock it in because the entire device is going to be manufactured the next year. And so this creates kind of a real cadence and rhythm for everyone in the ecosystem in terms of what's being developed, what are the next technologies, and kind of how to sort of operate as an ecosystem rather than independently. I think for me, that's the biggest opportunity to kind of port that philosophy and mindset over into pharma. And biotech and kind of the life science industry in general, because if everyone was aligned around kind of some common goals, where, what are the most important diseases to solve, or what are the most important things about human biology to understand, and then you had a very clear alignment in terms of what were those areas and kind of who was working on what, we could really make more progress much faster. And you quote that the numbers on kind of taking a drug to market. I mean, I'm still blown away by how expensive it is, and the probabilities of success still are very low. And that really creates, I think, a challenge for everyone working in this area.
The next question I wanted to ask you, when we were talking about how things are done in the semiconductor industry and how things are done in pharma. And what I wanted to ask you is pharma truly more complex than other industry, or is it just, or part of it is inertia, or the way we've been doing things and we continue to do them?
So I would say part of it is that, of course, there's a system that's already in place. And, I use the semiconductor industry as an example of a different model, but of course it was also built on that model. And for very specific necessity because of the level of engineering and capital that needs to be deployed. In the case of pharma, I think it grew up over time. And so there is an existing operating model that's already there. However, I also think the human biology is really difficult and complex. And we're probably just now at the point where we can have biological models that actually give us guidance, right? And that hasn't been true before because we didn't have the technology, of course, to sort of enable that. So I think maybe this is a bit of an opportunity to pivot in pharma, but I also think the human biology dictates that we do take more care in making sure that we understand the mechanisms and that we, fully vet from a human, toxicity standpoint, safety standpoint. These things are still very, very important, and they kind of warrant that level of time and focus. So it's not quite the same, but there are elements I think where it could be, optimized and streamlined.
But talking about that and the way technology is transforming R&D, I think it has never been more true now than ever before. And one of the things I see, and we had this discussion where you have large technology organization investing in pharma. Just this week, Anthropic announced that Vas, the CEO of Novartis, is joining their board. So now there is a lot of, those two domains are coming together. And sometimes also it creates tension because you hear engineers coming from the tech side saying, we want to treat biology as an engineering discipline. And the life scientists, and I'm a life scientist, we're always like, you can't do that,
right.
It's more complex. What's your take on that, on this transformation and those two words coming together and colliding? Because that's the beginning of it, but I find it very interesting.
Yeah, so I think if you kind of take it back a moment, the difficult or the challenging thing about AI for a scientist is that scientists are trained on you create a hypothesis, you design the experiments to test it, and then you verify or you validate or disprove that hypothesis. In the case of AI, we're saying actually the opposite. Collect a lot of data, put it together in a model, and then identify which parameters correlate with that response. And so it's shifting the how scientists work, right? Now, I think there's a world where both are equally important because what I've seen happen and where it really works is, yes, you can put the data in the model initially and identify the right parameters, but then you have to really understand the mechanisms for why that parameter matters. Are there is it causation or correlation? And dig deeper. And that's where the scientist becomes very, very important in terms of taking it to the next level and making sure that there's really real meaning there. So I think it's not one or the other. We have to have both. And I think right now we're in this middle ground where we're sort of, we have scientists experimenting, but also being a little bit uncomfortable. Over time, I think this will quickly evolve to where there's kind of a equal balance.
So where is it that you see already today AI and autonomous lab, and we'll talk about autonomous lab later on, already transforming the R&D workflows where there is a real, or do you see already a real impact, or is it still a little bit, hype versus real impact?
I mean, I think it's starting now.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about some of the things I see across the sectors and in my team. And what I will say is it helps the scientists have more informed guidance about the next experiment. So one of the things that we had launched a year ago was a Bayesian optimization algorithm on GitHub. We did it open source so that we could get other researchers to kind of build on it. But what's fascinating, and I was trained in kind of this traditional, DOE type methodology. The challenge with DOEs is you sort of assume you already understand kind of the right process space or response space to work in. In the case of Bayesian optimization, it actually takes you as far across the process window that you have, and you can find the optimum much faster. These kind of things I now see taking off in all three of our business sectors. And then also externally, we've gotten a lot of feedback through the open source. And And why is that important? Because if you can run 4 experiments versus 12, and you can do it in half a day versus a week, now all of a sudden the scientists' impact can be so much greater. So it's those kind of things that I think are immediately sort of changing the way we work.
So, you know, so I'm a structural biologist by training, and when I was doing my PhD, I remember a lot of the way we were designing experiment was very non-scientific, to be honest. Because in structural biology, essentially what you do is you mix 2 liquids and you really hope that a crystal will happen and that you can take it and solve the structure.
Right.
So what you do is it's very, at least at that time, it was really a brute force approach where you try as many as possible. And our way of doing things better was to transition from doing it manually to automating it. But now you mentioned DOE and Bayesian optimization, and now what I see is that, well, instead of picking a condition randomly, you can look at the experimental space and then use a mathematical approach to see. But this is so far away from the culture of a normal life scientist that a lot of life scientists I talk to don't really understand that. So how do you bring, or are you already bringing that to life science, this kind of mathematical approach to experiment design? And how do you get adoption, or how do you get life scientists who were not necessarily trained on doing this kind of approach to use this kind of approach?
Yeah, so I mean, my philosophy in general with AI digital expertise is you have to have an expert on the AI side or the digital side paired with an expert on the scientific side. And where I've seen it work is when we do that, where we have the expert in a specific digital domain going in and working with the scientists directly and kind of almost running the experiments together. Because that makes it the sort of activation energy. For a scientist, they don't have to learn the algorithms and what they're doing because they have an expert by their side. And so then they're more focused on, okay, what does the experiment mean? Does it make sense to go to this next process space or parameter space? And so my philosophy is putting the experts from digital AI in the businesses as close to the problems is where you really see the impact.
Yeah, so following up on that, one thing I wanted to ask, as a machine is starting to generate hypotheses, how we should rethink the balance between the human intuition and the machine-driven discovery? And I'll tell you a small anecdote. So I used to work for a company where we had our medicinal chemist, and we were working with a tech bio company that was doing prediction. Mm-hmm. Very often, we would receive a list of molecules that were predicted by the engineering team, sending them over to our medicinal chemists that were in Scotland. And I remember the medicinal chemist will tell us, it doesn't look right. My intuition tells me these are the wrong molecules. Mm-hmm. And I will always tell them, look, it's a machine. It doesn't think like you. So give it a try, or try to evaluate it the way you will evaluate anything from a scientific perspective. And that was a very difficult conversation. So what's your experience with that?
Yes. So we have a project that we designed as digital from the beginning. We started a new project on active targeting for LNPs to kind of expand the mRNA therapy space, right, that could be addressed. And so because that project was brand new, we were just starting up the labs, bringing the teams, we put a digital team in place, and we established an ELN, and kind of all the data was consolidated into a data lake right up front. And so the digital team over time was building predictive models on what were the right LNPs for the next experiment, and using Bayesian optimization that I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. There was a moment in time where the model got good enough to actually give prediction on the next formulation. And this is exactly your point, where the scientific team said, I don't think this will work. And interestingly, the leader for that project said, okay, let's run the one that has your intuition, and let's run the one that the model predicts, or a couple that the model predicts, and let's see if they give the predicted response. And I would say that was sort of the turning point for the lab team, because of course, some of their experiments also worked, but the predicted also gave really good recommendations in terms of formulations that were outside of the known space. that they would have thought of. And in this case, I think that it was the ratios were adjusted quite significantly, which is why there was this pushback. So from that point on, once they sort of validated, but also were able to run their own experiments simultaneously, I think that was the turning point for that team to adopt. And I think recognizing that scientists will have a bit of apprehension in just taking the output as kind of a given without verifying is something that still, it will always have to be addressed. And that's the right answer. Scientists should question if it makes sense.
So talking about transformation, I often hear the expression, the messy middle. And what do I mean by that is that we often talk about the successful pilot and the breakthrough use cases. But we also know that there are so many reports, regardless of the industry, where Gen AI pilots fail 95% of the time. Yes. But there are a few companies that manage to take them and scale them, and those companies are disproportionately successful. So is there anything you can share on what's your messy middle and how did you manage, or how are you successfully scaling a pilot?
Yeah, so I think this is an active topic in Merck right now. And I would say both myself and the CIO are working with the digital teams to figure out how to build this scale so that you truly get the ROI. I think for me, if I break down sort of why pilots work, there's a couple of things that are critical. First of all, there's a specific use case that typically a leader already knows as a problem and has brought to recommend. And that leader is sort of the early adopter. Already buys in. Maybe they haven't seen the benefit of AI, but they're willing to try. They don't need the proof. And then they can align the team around how to do that. And of course, because it's a pilot, you've got complete focus of the digital experts as well to make that successful. So you've got this kind of very aligned working model from top to bottom that makes those successful. When you then start to scale, you go to the next group and the next group, and you say, okay, you have to believe that this worked here, so it's also going to work here. And those leaders say, hey, I'm busy. I don't know. That business is different than mine, or that unit is different than mine. And so this translation becomes, I think, one of the biggest challenges that companies have. So it's not about the technology not working. It's about the business process mapping to kind of abstract it from specific product units or specific areas where you can say it only works there because X, Y, Z. So what we're working on now is identifying kind of key processes or key, functions within the company where you can map the process, run a pilot, but then translate very quickly. And then, I think the other key piece is getting the stakeholders on board before that pilot is run. Because if you really want to drive scale, as soon as the learning is built, it should be translated quickly to have the most impact for the company.
So if I walked into one of your active programs at the moment, where is it that I will see most friction?
The biggest challenge is in the areas where the businesses are already tapped in terms of resources. So if you I'll just take manufacturing as an example, but it's true across the board, commercial, supply chain, R&D. When those business units are fully busy working with customers or working on getting product out the door, it can be very difficult to then come say, hey, you know what, you need to spend 2 days learning how to use this Gen AI tool, right? Because they're saying, I don't have 2 days. I have to get product out and grow the revenue, for my part of the business. And I think that's where the friction comes. So figuring out how to carve out time or how to do what one of the digital people in the company, she calls it skill bites. It's like giving people mini lessons, learnings over time and pacing it so that they sort of build the knowledge but don't have to carve out multiple days in a training session. I think that's where we see the potential to sort of reduce that friction.
One expression I hear often is that when you ask people to do that, they say, you ask me to build a plane while I'm flying it.
Exactly.
So now I want to talk about data system infrastructures. So I've worked in the data field for the past 15 years. So when I started, we talked about big data. We don't talk about big data anymore. Then there was FAIR, and recently I was at a conference where there was one of the very senior leaders from another large pharma who said, we don't call it FAIR data anymore. We call them AI-ready data. And for him, it was more of a rebranding than something different. But on the other hand, I also heard many leaders say, we always had challenges getting our data project prioritized. And leaders get excited about AI projects, but, and I'm quote, but we don't understand that we can't have those AI projects successful if we don't have the right data. So for someone like you who has certainly, like hundreds of people reaching out and say, you need to prioritize my project, how do you balance that? And I mean, that's a bit of my bias, but I think that data is the foundation of everything. How do you make sure that you have the right data to fuel this, this AI transformation?
Yeah, I think this is a super important question, and one we keep revisiting, I think, every year. But what I would say, and maybe I can give a little bit of history on the journey for Merck. So, in the sort of 2016 to 2020 timeframe, so 2 CEOs ago, we had made an acquisition of Sigma-Aldrich. And at that time, when Sigma-Aldrich came in, they had just invested and kind of accelerated their e-commerce business. And this was really, I think, from a company standpoint, for the leaders in Merck, as this acquisition came in, they were sort of blown away by the potential that this e-commerce platform had. And that sort of launched basically an effort to build digital skills across the entire company. And it was sponsored by the CEO at the time. So I bring that up because we had a lot of digital capability expertise in the company. And then you start to, over time, realize, okay, in order to do this well, we have to have data governance, we have to have access to data, we have to have a structured approach that goes across the entire company. We don't want every individual business unit defining. So in 2021, when I came into this role, we had just done a data strategy across the entire company, gotten all the business units aligned. What was the cloud infrastructure? What's the governance responsibilities and specific roles? That then, so we had the data office both in my team initially, and then also in the sectors. And then as everything evolved and matured, that team went into our IT organization and merged. And I share that because actually, I think we have done this piece really well. And we haven't, because we've done it in such a structured way, and because there was support from the very top, both, the outgoing CEO, Belen, but also the prior CEO, Stefan Oshman, and now Kai, of course, coming in is fully on board with this. I think we've had that very top executive leadership that helps prioritize getting the data ready and prioritizing data. Now, interestingly, we've kind of taken it even a step further, and our CFO will always say, fix the basics. Yeah. Basically, the more you want to run AI, the more you have to make sure that the data is the right data, that you've got context for the data, that you understand what it means. And so I think this has even further accelerated and become something that's important and critical in the company. So I think that, given our history and sort of the strategy over time, I think we evolved into being ready to tackle this topic.
If I was to walk in one of your lab now and ask people how do they live this transformation, or where is it that they still see margin for improvement, what do you think they will say?
Yeah, well, I think they would say, I mean, we rolled out a internal version of ChatGPT, and this has got huge usage across the entire company. And when we look at our employee engagement survey and we ask about AI, everyone has a very high interest. Those scores are very high. So I think...
So the adoption is good.
So the adoption on the tools that are accessible. Yeah. On the other side, if they were asked, where can we improve? It's to really make an impact on the bottom line, top line with customers. And that kind of comes back to the prior discussion on building scale. because we have to scale these pilots now, or these tools to the processes that will make the most impact to the customers. And I think that's where our focus is right now.
So it's a great segue to the next question I had, is that if you imagine a fully connected end-to-end learning R&D organization, so what are the biggest structural or organization barrier to actually realizing this vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think one big structural challenge that we're tackling, but it's still a work in progress, is the access to the most proprietary data that the company has. Of course, your R&D, designing the next molecule for a drug or for a semiconductor material, is the most proprietary information we have. And so who has access, where that information is stored, that I think is one kind of key thing that continues to be a topic of discussion. On the other hand, I would say that again, this kind of universal infrastructure is something that has helped us there.
On this topic of who has access to the data, I was at a conference where there was someone in charge of data governance in a large pharma who said that the fundamental shift they saw is that in the past, data was really proprietary, was very siloed, and you would control who has access to the data. And he said the complete change that happened is that now the data that are produced are by definition accessible to almost everyone, which raises incredible question in terms of governance and security. Because as you said, there are things that are incredibly proprietary, but now they really think about data need to be accessible.
Right. So I think the chief data officer of our company, he always describes it like the Autobahn, right? If you want to go really fast, you also have to have very good safety in driving. And it's kind of the same thing. If you want to go really fast, the governance becomes even more important, and the data security, than it was before. And maybe the second challenge that then brings to is the autonomous labs, and also extends into manufacturing. How much of that information and infrastructure is connected to the cloud, and where does that stop, and kind of where are the levels? And that becomes important from a latency standpoint, from any disruptions, especially in the manufacturing environment, but also in an autonomous lab. I mean, ultimately, autonomous labs, we want to be able to run 24/7. So we don't want Microsoft updates coming into the lab and basically shutting down all the...
Sounds like an experience we went through.
We're working on it right now, but it's a very active topic.
So you're bringing the topic of autonomous labs. So we had this discussion a number of times. So you're building an autonomous lab, chemistry autonomous lab in Boston.
Yes.
So can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So 3 years ago, we looked across the entire company and said, what are the most important innovation areas, disruptions that are relevant for the future of the company? And one of the topics that came to the very top of the list was AI in drug discovery, but actually even more AI in chemistry, because we do chemistry for many different industries. And so we got the executive board approval as well as the family approval to build the autonomous lab in Boston. And basically we designed it so that it had diversity in terms of what chemistries it could run, and also in terms of the range of reactions. And that's maybe something that's different than other autonomous labs, where they're very focused on specific chemistries for a specific, that are relevant to a specific type of molecule. We said we want a really broad range, because today we might be working on one area, but tomorrow we might be working on a different area. And so that lab was designed and built over the past 2 years, and is now just coming on stream in May to be operational. I think for me, what is fascinating is, again, being a chemist, I did not fully appreciate how much of the kind of inherent knowledge that you have as a chemist has to be encoded into the software and the recipes that get sent to the lab. And this is really, I think, where this connection between the physical and the virtual world, or the in silico world, becomes super important. And how you do that will make all the difference.
So I'd like to talk about decision making in the AI era. So now if we assume that we have the data, the systems are in place, so how has AI changed decision making at the executive level, or has it already?
I think it's every quarter, every month it's evolving. That's what I would say. I mean, of course, when we look at, in investor presentations or others, I mean, our investors are using AI. We have to be kind of, we have to be active in that area as well. But I would also say it's become apparent that if all of us as leaders across the company are going to advocate for the use of AI, we also have to experiment with it. We also have to understand where it can add value. And I will say for me personally, the way I do this is to try to meet with the teams periodically and do deep dives on the technology, how they're using it, what's the most impact. So for example, the autonomous lab, we just were working on basically an inventory system and using AI for the inventory management. This is something, it's not obvious that that's needed, but actually the team has done an amazing job. We sort of identified a bottleneck in the process. We had 2 software engineers that kind of came together over 3 weeks, and they built an inventory management tool with the capability of Claude. Those kind of things, when you see it in action, when you really see how it works, then I can be a much better advocate in other areas where maybe I'm not as deep.
So how do you balance speed and stability when it comes to transforming large organization in the AI era? Because we talked about this. You have the best model now, 2 weeks from now, there will be a better model, and then another one, and they come from different companies. And for a large organization, at some point you need to freeze things and say, I'll pick something. So how do you balance that, getting stability versus getting the best thing for your scientists?
Yeah, I would say we have a couple groups in the company that are the experimenters. Yeah. That are testing. I mean, a lot of my team are the experimenters for new technologies, new capabilities that we need to bring in. Why do I say that? Because we can experiment with the tools without disrupting the day-to-day business. And that's super important, right? A lot of our businesses, in pharma, we're working with regulators. We're sending product to patients. We need to be careful, right, in terms of how we implement AI. But we also need the experimentation. So we have a group that experiments. Once we sort of identify, hey, these tools are relevant, then we bring it into our digital executive committee, which has representation across the company from the sectors, as well as many corporate functions, cybersecurity included, to look at, okay, if we want to try this, if we want to bring in this new tool, what are the guardrails we need to establish? And I think that system, of course, it's always evolving, I would say, in the operating model, but I think in general, that has worked pretty well for us.
Last time I checked, I think there was just in biology, something like 380 AI biology models, and I can't count the number of AI companies. So talking about your experimenters, how do they even identify those companies? And I think one thing I want to add is, I've been working with a lot of startups and coaching them sometime in their communication, because most of the time they will say the same thing. We use AI to solve cancer. And the other one will say something exactly similar. So they become extremely undifferentiated in the way they communicate, which I think for anyone outside makes it super difficult to say, I want to pick this one as my partner rather than that one. Absolutely.
Well, I think this is actually just came up this week as a question. The AI co-scientist is now kind of the emerging topic, and what is the best co-scientist, and how do we know, and what do we want them to do? I think for me, what has helped us filter, basically, of all those companies and research units and consortium, how do we filter down to what's relevant? It's understanding what problems we actually need to solve, right? And then looking at what we have internally and where are the gaps. And that is, for our experimenters, that means that we work very closely with the business sectors to understand where the problems are. So that kind of close collaboration becomes super important. So we're not chasing every model, every AI company. We're looking for the 5 that really solve this problem. And then you can distill it down to, okay, of those 5, these 1 or 2 are the best, and we can follow them more closely.
So one last thing from a leadership standpoint, is there a new skill that is emerging that is absolutely necessary for anyone, at a C-level, to make them successful in this era?
Yeah, a colleague of mine that has been on the digital forefront for years. We actually had this conversation last night. And I think we're kind of coming to the conclusion that rapid experimentation and testing becomes super important from a skill. But you have to do it within kind of a defined window of what do we want to know? How much risk is there in testing? And how quickly do we need the feedback? Because that makes a difference in terms of how you design the experiment. For example, if you have a product that you want to add a digital tool on top to see if it will sell more, or create a better user experience. If you only sell one a year, actually you will get very limited feedback statistically, and it will take a very long time. On the other hand, if you sell one product a day, now you can get experience from the customers and feedback very quickly and really run that experiment in a month. And so I think this willingness to understand how to test new concepts and new models, new business models quickly becomes super important for us as leaders, while sort of putting it in a guardrail so that you don't break the existing business.
So Laura, one thing I wanted to discuss also with you. So when we discuss this transformation we are going through, I think there are, without becoming too hyperbolic or philosophical, I think it's rare that society go through this kind of transformation. I mean, people call it a new industrial revolution, but the big difference, the last industrial revolution, when we took people from from working the fields to the factory, it was during, it took 50 to 100 years, like I think in France, I'm French, I know you can see with accent, we had maybe 90% of the population in the field, and now we have maybe 3%. But it took a lot of time, and society could adapt to this transformation. Now it feels like we have something which is maybe even more disruptive, but happening at rapid speed. And we hear a lot of companies saying, we cut our workforce by 30% because we can optimize things with AI. And I think a lot of it might be just the narrative. So I don't think that it necessarily has to do with AI, but there is certainly some truth behind that. AI is changing the way we work. It's changing a lot of things. So as a company that is employing a lot of people, there is a social responsibility. And also as a leader, the decision that you and your colleagues are making will have an impact on the workforce. So what's your take on it's a big responsibility. What's your take on that?
I think this is one of the most important things that company and leaders have to address today. And for me, it's not eliminating positions. It's how do we make the people in the roles more impactful? And that's where AI can be really enabling. And what that actually means in practice is actually much more detailed than just saying it. I'll give you an example of my own personal journey. So in COVID times, I was leading a business, and I asked, everyone in the business, I said, are there anyone would like to learn Python code and AI? And then we worked with a community college, and we did, I think, 40 hours of Python training and AI training on Saturdays. Every Saturday, we did it for 4 hours. Yeah. It was COVID, so this was a unique point in time. But what I learned from that experience was there were a couple of things that were super important. One, people had to have hands-on use of the technology, and you had to do it over time. And that there had to be sort of this peer-to-peer learning. What was fascinating in this cohort was we would write Python code separately, all on our own computers, but then we would share how the code looked. Some people wrote really elegant code. Mine was very long. But it was interesting because you also had this sort of peer-to-peer learning. So when we look at upskilling our workforce, I think this continuous learning becomes super important, and also people having hands-on experience with the tools, rather than just saying, okay, we did it one way yesterday, and for the past 50 years, tomorrow we're going to do it a different way. Because people have to get comfortable. They have to get used to how it's going to help them. And I think that becomes the way that you build, a skilled workforce for the future that's used to using AI as an augmentation for their work, for making greater impact, but also doesn't have this fear that, oh, it's going to take my job, right? It's more making them, more efficient, more impactful, and creating more value for the company. And that's, I think, for me, the discussion we should be having.
If you zoom out, and so if you look at Merck is the oldest pharmaceutical company in the world, and it's a European company, of course, a global company, but with European headquarters. And we see this, especially in technology and in AI, this really fight between the US on one hand and China on the other hand. And then it feels like Europe is a bit in the middle. And there is a lot of Euro bashing going on where we say, oh, we don't innovate, we regulate. What do you think will determine the long-term competitiveness of an enterprise like Merck being a European company?
So, I mean, we're a European company, and of course, our roots are here. Yeah. We're 358 years old. And I think for me, this has been fascinating learning, because to be in existence for 358 years and to look forward for the next several decades means that you have to continually evolve and improve and adapt. I think the approach that we're taking is to basically learn from every region. There are capabilities in Europe that are the best in the world. There are capabilities in China that are the best in the world, and same with the US. We have to learn from all of those to make sure that we're as relevant as possible. And, for me, given that we have an incredible customer base that spans, pharma, biotech, but also semiconductor, the leading tech companies making the AI devices, combined with providing drugs to patients in many different kind of relevant, and important areas, fertility, oncology, we have to be at the kind of cutting edge of what we're doing, and that won't come from any one region, any one group, and that's kind of the unique, I think, sweet spot that we have.
So now to close the discussion, I have two questions. The first one is I'll ask you to have your crystal ball, and what are the key trends you foresee in the biotech industry over the next few years, that particularly at the intersection of science and technology?
Yeah, so I am currently fascinated by the concept of building foundation models for chemistry, biology, and physics. I don't know what that means, but I think it's coming, and I'm fascinated in how it will work. And I see so much investment, initiative, and kind of acceleration on this topic. So that for me is sort of the biggest opportunity that's coming in the next couple of years.
I agree. We could have an entire discussion on that.
We could have an entire discussion, and I would have to.
Let's follow up on that.
Yes.
and the last one. So if a young scientist comes to you today and say, he or she is very smart and is looking, doesn't know where to go. So where should they join? Like a biotech, a tech company, stay in academia? What do you think? Which direction will you give them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all good. Yeah. So I wouldn't pick for them, but what I would say is get as much experience as possible in as many different domains as you can. And when you're asked to do a 6-month assignment, go do it, even if it's in an area you don't know. And I would say that was something that happened to me by chance early in my career when I joined Texas Instruments. Because I wasn't an expert in any one process, I got moved around every 6 months on a different project. The amount of experience and exposure I got was just incredible, just by virtue of working with the experts in all those different areas. So my advice always is for young professionals, say yes to as much as you can, be as active, build your network, and kind of build your muscle, the brain mass or brain muscle. For future experiences that you don't even know are coming.
I think it's a great way to conclude the discussion. Laura, thank you so much. And I have so many follow-up to do with you on so many different topics.
I know. Thank you so much, Thibaut. It's really been a pleasure.